You might wonder how it is that we came to have a park in what is basically the armpit of a major interstate exchange on the edge of a major metropolitan urban business district. The city has other parks in the downtown area, but they are much older and were established when the city was much smaller. Tiny Hyde Park, just west of the flying saucer of the convention center, was established in 1873, the same year that the city was incorporated. Burke Burnett Park was dedicated in 1917 to honor the namesake Burke Burnett. However, the area outlined in red on the slide that you're looking at now, or at least a portion of it at one time or another, was referred to as Hell's Half Acre due to the gambling, drinking, and carousing that occurred in the district. And so here I've highlighted towards the bottom of that little red shape in blue the outline of where today's Fort Worth Water Gardens are located. Prior to the 1964 bond election, where voters decided that they wanted a convention center and a baseball stadium, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram presented this image of a 16-block area that was originally designated for the Tarrant County Convention Center, and this was shown on March the 2nd, 1964. So on April 25th, 1964, the convention center bond issue passed almost 2-1. The same day the election results were published, which was the day after the election, so was this new visual for the convention center site. You'll notice it's minus 2 blocks in the northwest corner. So it's already shrinking. And then 4 months later, on August the 13th of 1964, it was back up to 16 blocks and had been shifted a block to the east. And then a week later, this diagram from the Fort Worth Press uses shading to indicate which area of the 16-block site would be occupied by the convention center building itself and which areas would be used for parking and landscaping. There's a total of 16 blocks with approximately 10 for the convention center, and the rest would be parking and landscaping. So 2 days later, on August the 22nd, the Fort Worth Press reported that the site had shrunk to 11 blocks, as it was determined that the 16-block site was not financially possible. The diagram on the left, shown with the white X at the top, the area removed from the building itself, and the black X's at the bottom and on the side indicate where parking and landscaping had shrunk. The diagram on the right, published on the same date by the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, however, still shows the 13-block layout. It is possible that this difference may be due to the Fort Worth Press running once a day and the Star-Telegram being printed multiple times in the same day. When I was working on my undergraduate degree, I had a history professor that said, I don't care if you learn the exact dates that things happened as long as you know the order in which the events took place. And I loved that because it seemed like you would have this knowledge of the events and not have to worry about memorizing the fiddly little dates. And I was thinking about all these changes with the convention center site, and man, those months and days really matter because things were changing so fast. So, kudos to my old history professor, but also sometimes dates do matter. So city and county leaders were concerned about what convention attendees would see as they approached the convention center from I-30. You're basically looking at the same view that they would see. In a 1984 documentary film of the Water Gardens, Ruth Carter Stevenson commented that the area now occupied by the Water Gardens had been smelly and blighted. But going back to the late 1960s, on June the 16th, 1966, Amon G. Carter Jr. sent a letter to the mayor and council of Fort Worth. He wrote, "Soon, Tarrant County will begin construction of a multi-million-dollar convention center that will become a major attraction in downtown Fort Worth. Many persons will visit this city to attend meetings, conventions, and other attractions at this new facility. Most of these visitors will get their first look at the convention center as they approach it from the east-west freeway. Unfortunately, the approach does not project the best impression of Fort Worth. The 4-block area immediately south of the convention center is characterized by old buildings that are badly deteriorated, although a few have been renovated and modernized. We propose that a public park be acquired and developed with landscaping, pools, fountain, and sculpture between the east-west freeway and the convention center. Such a park will serve the needs of the general citizenry for open space and beauty and will enhance the appearance of the convention center in downtown Fort Worth. The Amon Carter Foundation is ready to join with the city of Fort Worth in making possible the development of an attractive entrance to the downtown area and a vista that will enhance and beautify the convention center. We propose to participate by providing funds for buying land and developing a public park with appropriate sculpture and landscaping to make the convention center the showpiece of the Southwest. We hereby offer the City of Fort Worth and its citizens a gift of funds to be used for the purchase of land, including Monig's wholesale building and the filling station, clearance of present buildings, and initial park not to exceed $1 million. In the event you are unable to acquire the Monig and Phillips Petroleum Company properties, the amount is not to exceed $500,000. The foundation proposes to donate, in addition to the amount above, works of sculpture in the form of a fountain for the park area. The gift is offered to the City of Fort Worth on the condition that the city will acquire for public use all land in an area bounded by the convention center to the north, Houston Street on the west, Commerce Street on the east, and Lancaster and Monig's warehouse on the south. Such land shall be acquired by the city in accordance with its regular procedures, and no more than the fair market value will be paid, as determined by independent appraisers and through court action if necessary. Our evaluation indicates that the amount of the gift is not sufficient to complete the purchase, clearance, and development of the area. The Amon Carter Foundation is also aware that the City of Fort Worth does not have the funds available for such a project. Therefore, it is proposed that the city apply for a grant under the Open Space Land Program of the Department of Housing and Urban Development in order to provide sufficient funds for the complete park acquisition and development program without financial burden to the Fort Worth taxpayers. Should such approval not be granted, and should the city not be able to provide funds from another source within 3 years from the date of this letter, then this offer is withdrawn. Since the desired objective of the foundation cannot be achieved without city or federal financial participation. Our offer is based on the city agreement to accept and maintain the park upon its completion in accordance with the same standards of maintenance applicable in park areas of a similar nature throughout the city. We feel this park, when developed and fully beautiful, will be one of the great civic assets of Fort Worth, and it is with a great sense of anticipation and delight that we look forward to working with our city council in making it a reality. Now, I know that was a long letter to sit there and read to you, but it's really how we ended up with this park, the genesis of it. On Saturday, June the 18th, 1966, the Amon Carter Foundation made a public announcement that it was offering the City of Fort Worth the $1 million for creation of a park just south of the Tarrant County Convention Center site. It was hoped that the City of Fort Worth would apply for and be awarded the federal open space grant to obtain the rest of the funds necessary to complete the park. Title VII of the Housing Act of 1961 provided grants to states and local public bodies to help finance the acquisitions of title or other interest in the open space land in urban areas and for open space uses, including park and recreational purpose, conservation of land and other resources, or historic, architectural, or scenic purposes. Grants could cover up to 50% of the total cost of the project. According to a mayor and council communication dated September 19, 1966, City Manager J.L. Brownlee submitted resolutions to the council for adoption. The resolutions were in regard to procedures for acquisition of the needed property for the park and for authorization to submit an application for the federal grant to the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The grant request was for $966,570, or 50% of the estimated cost of property acquisition and building demolition, plus the full cost of the estimated relocation expenses paid by the federal government. And according to the mayor and council communication, City Manager J.L. Brownlee submitted resolutions to the council for adoption. The resolutions were in regard to procedures for the acquisition of the needed property for the park and for authorization to submit an application for the federal grant to the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The grant request was for $966,570, or 50% of the estimated cost of property acquisition and building demolition, plus the full cost of the estimated relocation expenses paid by the federal government. So those were for people that either had businesses or there were a lot of little hotels in that area, and so they were relocating the people that were living in those places. The local share of the cost of property acquisition and demolition was $781,800, which would be provided by the Carter Foundation. In addition, the foundation agreed to finance the park development and beautification. Included in the application was a survey of the buildings on the site of the proposed convention center park, which revealed that 28, and earlier in the application they gave the number 29, so I'm not sure whether it was actually 28 or 29, existing buildings, all but 3 were classified by the Building Division of the Public Works Department as Type 3 non-fire rated. In greater detail, this type of building is characterized by masonry walls, wood floor and roof joists, wood floors, and wood or embossed metal ceilings. This and the next 2 photographs were part of the supporting documentation for the open space grant application. The site was within the limits of the city's Fire Zone 1, and the building code at the time did not permit Type 3 buildings in this zone. Recalling that this area was pretty much in the heart of the old house half-acre district of the city, it is unsurprising that many of the businesses in this area in the late 1960s were inexpensive hotels. Many only charged 50 cents to $1.50 per night for a room. Now, this was in the late 1960s. Today's equivalent would be $4.56 to $13.69 a night. There were cafes, bars, liquor stores, pawn shops, loan shops, and a few other retail businesses in that 4-block area. Unsurprisingly, not everyone was on board with this plan. Oscar Monig, grandson of the founder of Monig's Department Stores, was one such person. The Monig's business had a building located at 100 East 15th Street where they conducted their wholesale business. And then there was also a clothing store next door. This photo was taken the same year that the building was built, in 1924. Unlike many of the neighboring buildings, the structure was well built and well maintained. Monig wrote to I.J. Ramsbottom, who was the Community Development Specialist of the Renewal Assistance Administration of the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development here in Fort Worth, and he also copied Mr. Dwight Reddy, Division of Land Development, the Department of Housing and Urban Development in Washington, D.C. So he's reaching out to the same people that the city is applying for the Open Spaces grant to. And he provided supplemental information in the form of 21 points pertaining to the city's open space grant application. Remember the part of the letter from the Amon Carter Foundation where they said that if the city could not obtain the Monig building and the Phillips gas station, they would only provide $500 of funding? Monig was quick to point out to Ramsbottom and Reddy that the city had not included the foundation's letter in the supporting documents with the open space application. And in the application, the city had stated that they had formally accepted the gift. And so Monig felt that there were pertinent details that were being left out of the application. In my opinion, the council had made a formal resolution to accept the gift. And so I think Monig's point about the contingency is valid. He also protested the characterization of many of the buildings in the proposed park area. He proposed other uses for the site, such as a transportation center, think what used to be called the ITC, I can't remember the new name for it, I should know this, or convention center parking. Monig also took issue with the land acquisition and demolition costs presented by the city in the application as being unrealistic and asked where additional funds would come from if that was the case. He also brought into the discussion the recent rejection of an urban renewal project on the ballot 66 days earlier. And there will be more on the urban renewal point shortly. Monig stated, "There is great inequity about an offer from a single private tax-exempt foundation which attempts to trigger off governmental powers of condemnation to carry out what it conceives to be desirable." He also claimed that the 4 blocks proposed for this garden park is actually part of the most logical area for future hotels and necessary parking facilities for them, as well as for the convention center. Later, he asserts that downtown parks are not used by the general public and continues with a screed against parks in downtown urban areas across the country. Monig engaged the Paul Ridings public relations firm to assist him with a campaign against the park. He requested that people in support of his views send letters to him and received at least 79 such letters. However, 2 of them were not in support, they were against. So in the end, in April of 1967, okay, let's go one more. Oh, no, go back. Okay, well, there's supposed to be a letter there. The letter was a photocopy anyway, and it wasn't great. But in April of 1967, the federal government determined that the city's project did not qualify for the grant program. Regional Administrator W.W. Collins delivered the verdict to Mayor DeWitt McKinley. It was suggested to city leaders that the project would, however, qualify for an urban renewal grant. But if you will recall, they had just rejected an urban renewal project the year before. So things were pretty quiet for the next couple of years, Leanna. And in August of 1969, the Amon Carter Foundation made the city an offer of $2 million for development of a garden center at the main entrance of downtown Fort Worth. The funds would finance acquisition of a 4-block area south of the convention center, except for the Monig's Wholesale Dry Goods and Phillips 66 service station. The garden center, still to be designed by Philip Johnson, was described as an outstanding facility with pools, fountains, landscaping, and sculpture. And on August 28th of 1969, the Star-Telegram reported that the City Council would be considering the $2 million offer from the Amon G. Carter Foundation for development of a garden center at the main entrance to downtown Fort Worth. And it was kind of difficult researching the history of this because what they were referring to it as changed so many times. The first phrase they used to identify it was the garden center. And I mean, to me, that sounds like they're going to Callaway's or something. And then there was, you would see it referred to as the water garden, singular, and also the water gardens. So, details of the park have not been completed, but the Carter Foundation officials have indicated that it would be an outstanding facility with pools, fountains, landscaping, and sculpture. Architect Philip Johnson of New York, designer of the Amon Carter Museum facility, would be the designer of the garden center. The Park and Recreation Board gave 100% approval for the project on August 29th of 1969, and the council accepted the $2 million gift from the Amon Carter Foundation on September 3, 1969. Oscar Monig was at that council meeting and protested the garden center. Although the wholesale building was not to be impacted by the park, the clothing store was slated for demolition. W.S. Watt Kimball Jr. said, "Sometimes business interests must be set aside for the good of the city," and called the development great for Fort Worth. On February 12, 1971, a scale model of the so-called Garden Center was revealed at City Hall, and by August of 1972, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram reported that the Convention Center Park, funded by the Amon Carter Foundation, was to be known as the Fort Worth Water Gardens. It will cost more than $3 million. Construction on the water gardens began in 1973. That year, the Exchange Club of Fort Worth honored the Amon Carter Foundation with their Golden Deeds Award and specifically called out the Fort Worth Water Garden project as an exemplary project. Leanna, I'm sorry. Oh, I think you may have been one ahead of me. Can you go back? Oh, there we go. So we've got the Golden Deeds banquet program there and an excerpt from the text inside it where they were lauding the water garden project. Okay, next. And this is an aerial view of the water gardens while under construction. That's from UTA's Fort Worth Star-Telegram photo collection. And then the Fort Worth Water Gardens opened on October the 19th, 1974, so that's just a few days under 50 years ago. It doesn't seem quite possible that it's been 50 years ago, but so this photo is of the dedication ceremony that happened on the 19th of October. Some statistical details about the water gardens. There are over 5, or according to a 2014 Texas Highways article, 10 miles of pipes in the gardens that pump over 19,000 gallons per minute. Construction took 17,000 cubic yards of concrete. The pool is 650 feet long and moves 4,500 gallons of water per minute. Although it looks still on the surface, there are 570 gallons of water flowing underneath the adjacent quiet pool. The aerated pool had 40 nozzles that sprayed 2,500 gallons of water per minute, and the active pool moved 10,500 gallons of water per minute down a 38-foot drop into a basin. And I just wanted a little aside, in 1977, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram reported that John Gauss was the water gardens plumber. I don't know if he's related to the Gauss Funeral Home Gausses or not, but I'm just really interested in the people that made this park run, and we'll get to another one of those individuals in a moment. Leanna? So the Water Gardens makes an appearance in news clips, a sci-fi movie, a documentary, a commercial, and a music video. SMU Libraries has digitized a segment of film of groovy young local journalist Bob Ray Sanders at the Water Gardens. This film is a promotion of an upcoming event at the Water Gardens, which was to be a joint concert with the Fort Worth Symphony Orchestra and the North Texas State University's 1 O'Clock Jazz Lab Band. And I've actually got this pulled up. I'm going to step down here and we're going to go all wild and see if we can get to that video. So this, I don't actually have that one, but I do have a clip of the sci-fi movie, which was Logan's Run. No, that's not it. Ooh.
There's no time to check into energy somehow. Not aware of it. Took it for granted, like everything else. I think it's our early dinner.
And you can see there they've used some special effects to add some more water gardens up at the top.
Okay, and where is from current slide? Well, okay.
All right, so we're back in business. So I can send everybody who signed in with your email a list of these links, because the one from Channel 8, I mean the one with Bob Ray Sanders, it's pretty funny, just listening to the way that he was speaking about the water gardens. And then they had a couple of the musicians from the NTSU 1 o'clock Jazz Lab Band. All right, and then Leanna. So we were talking about the point of whether it was singular or plural on the gardens. And in 1987, Bob Crow, who was then the executive director of the Amon Carter Foundation, wrote this letter where he was stating that Ruth Carter Stephen had specified that she wanted the park to be called the Fort Worth Water Gardens in the plural. And go ahead, Leanna. So in 1984, on KERA, there was a documentary about the water garden. It's a really, really interesting video, and I can include that in the link for you. It was produced by Mitchell Johnson, and it ran in 1984, taking a deeper look at the iconic Fort Worth water gardens, the inspiration for the creation of the park, and what inspired architect Philip Johnson to create its design and layout. Mitchell Johnson has produced award-winning documentary and feature-length dramatic productions for the global marketplace. And he moved back to, he was from Texas and moved away, and then he came back and co-founded Fort Worth Productions, which is the company that produced this. And so the film captures discussion between Philip Johnson and also John Berge. So, Leanna, if you will. And also it features Tom Rusty Rust. He was the assistant park supervisor who was in charge of the water gardens, as well as architects John Berge and Philip Johnson. Rust commented, "I feel more at home down to the water garden than I do my own home. In fact, my wife thinks I'm married to the water garden." And I just thought it was kind of cute. But he was employed there after Gauss was. And so also later in the documentary, we learned that Rusty was sometimes called Dr. Water Gardens. So it's really kind of interesting, because at the beginning of the documentary, it shows him opening up a hatch, actually 2 panels on the ground, and descending a little staircase, closing it behind him. He puts his lunchbox away. But now when you go there, there's like a regular little small, not really a building, almost more like a shed, and you've got a door you walk into. So I don't know if that was already there originally, or if that was from some of the renovations they've done along the years. Leanna? So Johnson made several interesting observations during the documentary. One of his first statements was that all my best work is in Texas. He went on to say that architecture cuddling people was a sign of successful design. Now, I don't know that I would consider the water gardens cuddly. I mean, they are, considered brutalist design, which I had for a long time mistakenly believed that brutalist design meant that things were blocky and rough and, kind of brutish. But actually, it's more like brut champagne. It's raw. So they're using materials that are in more of a raw form. Leanna? Johnson said that the water gardens give the illusion of being in the city, but also not in the city. He continued, water is central to cities. It is active and does many things. Jumps, it's quiet, mists, makes noise. Water in architecture creates inspiration. It can convey impassibility, danger, and falling. Author William Williams suggested to me that the sense of danger was intended to reflect that in nature. I was surprised to hear Johnson liken the park to Disneyland, but he said that when he was describing the variety amongst the different spatial experiences in the park, he compares the arid central square of the park to a town square. He continues his analogies, comparing the water gardens to a Gothic cathedral in that a processional was intentionally created in the space. Again, Johnson says, the whole point of architecture is to make people want to see it. Otherwise, you just wouldn't bother. The whole point of the water there was to create something that would keep people coming back, and that is exactly what has happened. Some additional design notes. The aerated pool was designed so that the plane created by the top of the spray from the 40 nozzles was level with the sidewalk. Johnson notes that this was very difficult to achieve. Also, they conducted a lot of research to determine the height of the terraces in the park. 14 inches is perfect for sitting. 18 inches is the standard for chairs. So they chose 20 inches, saying, we don't want you to recline, we don't want you to lay down on it. So it does sound a little bit like some hostile architecture in the park. And I mean, especially for somebody short like me, that 20 inches, I'm like... And regarding the quiet pool, Johnson didn't want anything human scale anywhere to break the monotony of the 20-foot high walls. Johnson commented that the architecture forces you to be quiet. Now, during that clip of Logan's Run, you noticed how the sound of the water dominated the soundtrack. The idea of a microcosm is extremely important. Every one of these effects is a microcosm. The microcosm that we have in Fort Worth gives you pleasure partly because it is a microcosm of something much bigger. Sadly, at 5:30 p.m. on March the 21st, 1991, IRS employees Larry James Watkins and Michael Scott Barnett, who were in town for a training, were killed in a freak accident when one of the 7 5,000-pound light poles in the water gardens fell and crushed them. The wind was 30 miles per hour that day. The pole was made of Corten steel, which was supposed to be self-weatherizing and low maintenance. The park was temporarily closed while the remaining Corten poles were removed. By 1996, when the water gardens were 22 years old, change and repairs were needed. The Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990, so in 1996, 3.5 feet of concrete was added to the surface around the quiet pool so that visitors who were in wheelchairs could view the feature. And this change then necessitated handrails around the ledges that surrounded that pool. During those renovations, areas with stairs were converted to ramps where possible. Other repairs were discussed at that time too, because a hard freeze in the winter of 1990 broke the pipes leading to all but one of the nozzles in the aerated pool. Concrete was cracked and spalling in many areas. And so, in June of 1993, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram quoted Park and Recreation Department Director Richard Zavala as touting the traffic buttons he and his crew had installed in the water gardens as working very well. Zavala continued, "It costs us $1 for the button, and you put them down where the footing changes or stairs begin to give visitors enough warning so that they can shift their attention from the scenery to their footing." Citing budgetary concerns, Zavala said he could only afford to put a 3-person crew in the park 1 day a week to keep it mowed and trimmed, the pools cleaned, and the pumps maintained. He schedules 1 person to spend 20 hours a week picking up litter. And so that was back in 1993. The guiding the year 2000, there was a study conducted on the water gardens, and the guiding principles of the study were sound. They addressed major concerns that people cited as reasons why they did not visit the park. Interestingly, one of the things that they wanted to do was to enhance visible access. And Leanna, can you? No, never mind. I have skipped ahead a slide. So they partnered with Downtown Fort Worth, Inc., a Fort Worth Water Garden study composed of study committee composed of various stakeholder representatives and the Amon Carter Foundation. They were there for the funding to analyze the park and develop creative but feasible strategies that would increase public use of the park. The study was happening adjacent to the Lancaster Corridor redevelopment project. All right, now Leanna. The guiding principles of the study were sound. They addressed some of the concerns that people cited for reasons why they didn't go to the park. One of the third one there about enhancing visual and pedestrian access. I was just speaking with somebody yesterday who had moved to Fort Worth from New York City, and they had driven past the water gardens but had no idea what was actually in there, because from the outside you don't get an impression of what you would expect in there. But at the same time, how would improving visual access disrupt the sense of escape from the city on the inside that Johnson had worked so hard to create? I also wonder how much thought Johnson gave to the Texas weather when the park was designed. It's a lot better now, but if you look at the early pictures from when it was new and the landscaping was not mature, you're out there, it's the blazing sun, that concrete is just absorbing the heat all day long, and then it radiates it for hours after sunset. And then also our random hard freezes that we have and all that plumbing. So the study recommended numerous repairs and some other changes, such as removing the traffic buttons from the steps. Interestingly, the report states in regard to the landscaping, once a comprehensive maintenance program is developed, the park is also likely to attract people to observe daily operations, such as the planting of flower beds and seasonal changes. I think that they didn't express what they intended to with that statement. I think they were trying to say that people would enjoy coming to see the gardens at different times of the year as the landscaping changed, but the way that they wrote it, it sounded just a step above watching grass grow. Oh, we're going to watch the guys plant today. All right, Leanna. And unfortunately, 4 more deaths occurred on June the 16th of 2004. A family was visiting Fort Worth in town for the National Baptist Sunday School and Baptist Training Union Congress. They were representing Antioch Missionary Baptist Church of Chicago at the conference. 8-year-old Lauren Dukes was exploring the active pool with her brother Christopher, her father Myron, and Wantrese Dedman. Lauren fell into the center of the active pool. Wantrese fell in as she tried to aid Lauren, and Christopher and Myron jumped in to try to save the girls. Sadly, all 4 perished. Antioch Missionary Baptist Church later presented the city of Fort Worth with the certificate I have with me today. So I'm going to put the mic down for just a minute. And this beautiful frame and certificate were presented to the city of Fort Worth in memory of the 4 who perished. The Fort Worth Water Gardens has become well known in the half-century it's been around. In addition to the 1984 documentary, it's also been featured in architectural journals, lifestyle magazines, the sci-fi movie Logan's Run, and a music video. The music video is Kendrick Lamar's N95, which was filmed in 2022. The N95 refers to the masks that everybody was wearing at the time. I'll include a link for that. And then there's also a great commercial that was filmed in 1988 in the Water Gardens. It was for WFAA. And I'm going to see if we can play that real quick. And I'm pretty sure that it was in violation of the rules that are posted all over the Water Gardens. Places, people climbing where you're not supposed to climb. Sorry, I'm just gonna lay in your lap. Oh, wait, sorry, that started too late in the video. There we go. So that looks like my senior year in high school. Oh. There we go. So now we're back at Logan's Run. And then this is just a still that ran in the newspaper about that promotion from WFAA. And then this is the music video. I'll go ahead and play this little clip. It's just a few, maybe I won't. Oh, that's because it's a still image. Never mind, I'll send that link in the email. But I think that this is really something very special that we have here in Fort Worth. There are plans, the city has contracted with Freese and Nichols on a major renovation project at the Water Gardens, and I believe it's scheduled to take place from July of 2026 through July of 2027, so it'll be a whole year-long project. There's a lot of maintenance projects going on at the Water Gardens, and it's anticipated that by 2027, major pump, lighting, and other construction projects will be complete. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, I was wondering, I noticed that you highlighted how the city government had particularly taken an interest in the relationship to the convention center and gardens. Can you address how it was to be related to the Lancaster, Champs-Élysées plans, and also the 1,000-foot removal of I-30? How did it affect the gardens?
So I don't think that the debris actually was a problem for the gardens, to my knowledge. But I know that they were hoping that once the elevated 30 was removed, that it would really open up the visual access to the Water Gardens. And I mean, looking at some of the earlier photos I had seen of it, I can see where that would be the case. I mean, I was 4 when they opened, so I can remember what it was like then, but just barely. And I think that just because it is in such close proximity with Lancaster and, like you were saying, the revitalization project for that corridor, I think that they were just trying to include the Water Gardens that was referenced in the 2000 study a few times, that, they kind of wanted to hinge off of each other. And also with the Trinity Metro Rail. So it's like you go for the Water Gardens, then you have to cross Lancaster to get to this mode of transportation. So they're interlinked. Anyone else? Okay.
Do you know what they did after the 4 people died? What they did to make it safe if somebody fell in now?
Yes. They changed the depth of the water that was in the active pool, is what it was called. And it's, I think, 3 feet deep now. Well, I think another thing that they did is more signage for no swimming, but they weren't swimming, somebody fell in. And I can see how that could happen because I have a little bit of vertigo, and I tried to go down in there a few weeks ago, and I got about a third or a little bit more of the way down, and I had my work phone and my personal phone on me, and I thought, you know, even if I don't fall in, if I fall, it's going to create a big headache for me. And so I just turned around and went back up. But, you know, having that water rushing beside you and then the noise in your ears, it messes with your equilibrium a little bit. Anyone else? Okay.
You know how the ADA determines what needs to be changed on the structure of that? Obviously, they can't change the steps on it. How do they decide?
Well, I think that the compromise is that where it was possible for them to make changes, like, you know, installing a ramp or the adding of the additional 3.5 feet of concrete, they did that. But with the ADA, I don't believe that they're required to change everything that was pre-existing, you know, in a situation like that. Like if it's a building, yeah, you've got to have an elevator. But, and I think even in a historic building that, and Carol, you would probably know more about this, that in a historic building, there can be some exclusions for that. And you had a question, sir?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier on, I think it was part of the bond vote, you mentioned the ball deal. Did that actually pass, or what happened?
Yeah, that was Arlington Stadium. Yep. Anyone? Oh, go ahead.
Upcoming renovations to start in 2026, how is that funded?
I actually don't know how it's funded, but I do know that I've seen the contract, so.
Is
But
the budget for it currently city budget?
as far as maintaining it, yes, it's part of the Parks Department, Park and Recreation. Okay.
You know, when they were talking about the Monica warehouse, you missed a really key point. DeWitt McKinley was running for mayor,
Ah.
and he had a campaign song that they were gonna condemn it. And he had a campaign song that says, "Give me a home."
Do you want to sing it?
Give me a home where the buffalo roam and it's free from eminent domain. First Republican elected in Tarrant County since Reconstruction, if anything.
Well, thank you for that interesting tidbit. And was that on the radio?
Oh, it was everywhere, TV, radio, he was.
Okay.
I'm Bob Adams, an old retired architect. My father was the construction superintendent on the water gardens at Thomas S. Burn. And at that time I was in school, but I'm an old archaeologist also. So I went down there to the water gardens and dug some of the sites, and I got Bowman's bottles, Schuster's shoes, and the Busy Bee Cafe, were some of those buildings that were torn down. I got all kinds of artifacts from those places, and I had a whole notebook of photographs, and I have boxes of artifacts that I dug out somewhere in my garage warehouse. It was an interesting deal. And I'm so proud of my father, who passed away some time ago, but building that thing was something else.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I know one of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram articles that we had, I think in our vertical files, talked about all the different bottles that they were finding when they were, Fort Worth Brewing, the Fort Worth Artesia. Yeah. They were probably talking about you then. All right, does anyone have any other questions? Oh, when they were building it? Oh. I think that they would probably tend to float up, and they do turn off. I don't know what the schedule is now, but they used to turn off the water at night. Oh, okay. So all right. I thought that initially. I thought that's what you were asking, and then I thought you were asking about bodies being found in the. Okay. Well, I know that today, if you found a body while you were doing a construction project, everything stops. And I think even back then, that was already the case at that time. So probably no, but I know somewhere else in downtown Fort Worth, fairly recently, they had discovered an indigenous female's body or remains. So, any other questions? All right, well, thank you so much for joining us.